yeah, I can start using words like a priori and a posteriori in your just everyday language, just to confuse them. Okay, well, I did okay on most of this, though. I tell you though, the last paragraph just anyway, yeah, I was so very confused. But um, so logic. Where do we want to start? Passive and active faculties, receptivity versus what's the other one? Anyway, how are we doing on that first stuff? The section on logic as such, intuition versus the understanding.
I don't know. I feel like I had a dim echo of what the transcendental aesthetic is, let alone the analytic.
Well, we're just getting started on so
Well, I will say one thing I really liked about this reading is that, I mean, while I might there might be areas that if you push me, on certain if you on like what some of these words really mean or whatever, I might not be able to say, but I at least have even just from this reading alone, to me, per my understanding, a pretty coherent sort of like set of steps that led from the start of the chapter to the end. I know this seems like it's like the most vague possible. Like this is, it should any philosophical book or argument should follow that, right? There should be a pretty, easy to follow sort of track of the argument. But in this, it's especially clear, is all I'm trying to say. And when we ask like a question like what is the, like the transcendental analytic, I have like just it right here with like an equal sign and a quote. And I see like there's a sort of step from how we got it starts with cognition as the two elements of intuition and concepts, and he goes from there and links, like Lincoln logs, clicks the terms together kind of in a cascading sort of procession through the chapter from cognition, the two elements of intuition and concepts, to empirical and pure intuition and concepts, uh, and then the science of the, or well, actually, the receiving of representations being sensibility, and the bringing them forth, the bringing forth of those representations being understanding, and the science of the rules of that understanding being logic. It all kind of follows. And the transcendental analytic, as far as I understand, is like the analysis of the entirety of a priori cognition, which must be the idea of the whole in a connected system, and starts first with concepts and then with principles. And so I get that. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure if you ask me, like, oh, well, what's that? When you say X, what do you mean by I'm like pretty confident that given enough time looking back through these notes, like I could answer just about, you know what I mean? It feels like it's something that people say a lot about this is that one part can kind of lead you to the rest, you know. And I like it. I like that about this. But I didn't find it too puzzling at any point. I mean, the parts about the dialectic were funny. I knew those were coming. I knew the dialectic part was coming. And he really he's got some strong opinions there. But anyway, I thought it was good.
Well, like the Ethiopian wandering, can you be my Saint Peter and explain this to me? Because how am I supposed to understand this?
Carefully.
I was confused because I thought he was making a distinction, and he had mentioned this earlier in the book about experience, and begging your pardon for using the word empirical, but I thought he was saying the logic or concepts are different, but that, like on page 106, the paragraph about halfway down, the first one,
Recording in progress.
they are empirical. I'm sorry, did I do something?
So I don't. I'm wondering. Maybe Prince. Maybe you want to mute your. Let's see. We're getting a terrible, terrible feedback.
Got some avant-garde drone music.
You're the host. Now that you can mute him.
I like that. That's kind of cool.
It's pretty intense. It's pretty debilitating.
Okay, there we go. So, Ed, if you're still there,
Yeah,
yes.
I didn't know if I had done it, so that's why I turned off everything in case I was the culprit. I apologize if that was me. I don't know what I did, and thank you for fixing it. On that first paragraph at the top of 106, about halfway down, he's saying they, which I think is referring to Kant. Well, he says both intuition and concepts are either pure or empirical. They are empirical, so that they, I'm assuming it is referring to both intuition and concepts. They're empirical if they contain sensation. Sensation presupposes the actual presence of the object. So to me, that's empirical, right? That's something we can experience through our senses. If they contain sensation, sensation presupposes the experience of the object. They are pure if no sensation is mixed in with the presentation. But I thought he had said in our earlier readings in this book, I'm just going to say, where do the pure come from? How do they originate if they're not originating from the sensations? Because I thought he said earlier in this book that it's that it's difficult to have, even in abstract reasoning, not to have some kind of real world referent. But I'm not understanding more than I'm understanding, so just wanted to ask you all to help.
So remember, I think this is stuff we've seen before, at least in general. He says prior to him, and I think he would say, the question was, how does the mind conform to the objects? So, when you have a world out there and you're trying to get knowledge of the world out there, the question is, how does the object out there in the world conform, or how does the mind conform to the object out there in the world? So, how does the mind, in a sense, grasp that which is kind of alien to the mind? How does the mental grasp the physical? But then part of the Copernican turn is that he says, this has proved to be an insoluble problem. So maybe we should ask, do objects conform to the mind rather than does the mind conform to objects? And so that's his approach, is saying that in some ways objects conform to the structure of the mind, but then there's still the matter of experience that I don't know if outside the mind is the right word, but that intuitions are presented to the mind. So the mind sort of passively gets these intuitions. And so you've got these intuitions coming in, and then you have the mind that processes that information. And it is that processing part that is not the empirical, that is not, I shouldn't say it's not empirical. So like an empirical experience is those two coming together. The way the mind structures experience, and then the data, the sensory data coming in as intuitions. And so, in the Transcendental Aesthetic, we saw how he says space and time are part of the way the mind organizes empirical information or sensory data so that it can make sense of it. And now he's saying, but there are additional structures in the mind that form experience, that form empirical objects as well. And so somehow I think I'm not answering your question. I thought I was going to start, but that part of the purely rational, non-empirical. So you've got this data coming in from the senses, but then you have this other part that is a priori, that is already sitting there waiting to process that sensory data. And at least that's the way I think about the stuff that's purely rational. It's not part of what is the mind is passively accepting through sensation. It's something that is already in place, like the forms of intuition, space and time. And now there's these sort of logical forms that are prepared to process that empirical data and make sense of it. So that's the way I think of the pure part, is that it's that part that's already sitting there, as it were, waiting to provide structure and form to this passive sensibility.
Yeah, I actually took it as sensibility is just almost tied to the way he described intuitions. It's just space and time gives us just raw, unadulterated information. And then I don't know if this is even a good analogy, but like the way he describes the understanding is like this a priori form of categories or concepts. Like I viewed it like a coin shifter. Like sensibility would be like dumping all the coins in the coin shifter, and that's empirical. And then understanding is what you have these a priori concepts that kind of shift it through like the way that we are able to see it through our spatial temporal lenses. And then the like what he called like or kinesis. He didn't call it gnosis. He called it something different. But it's both of those combined. But I don't know if that's right.
I'm wondering if I've already talked a lot again, but I'm wondering if maybe we should say something about when he talks about the understanding, because Ed had asked something up there earlier in response to a question about understanding and knowledge. And for Kant, the understanding has a very specific meaning. And it's not like, oh, well, I understand that. That's not what he means by understanding, at least not simply that. So maybe we should talk about what does Kant mean by the understanding.
Well, I put it in the chat kind of, but I actually just never, just to the shortest possible answer I could give is like you're saying, not merely that, but I think that's a great illustration of it, right? Is like something goes from being foreign or unrecognizable or novel, some concept, some idea, some TV show, plot description, whatever, that's impinging upon you, and you think, that's weird and foreign and I don't understand it. But then something clicks and you think, oh, I understand that. I actually understand that. And it gets slotted in your cognition into a group of understandable stuff from the sensuous manifold of all that stuff out there to stuff I understand. It gets kind of shuffled into the deck. It gets added to the collection under the umbrella of understandable stuff. And that's what I see as the basic mechanism, is sorting things into bins and placing things under umbrellas and organizing, judging, categorizing, working according to that. But he uses a lot of weird phrases to describe this activity, this like spontaneity of cognition, I quoted it here in the chat, the bringing forth of representations, I think is all kind of part of this categorizing game that it's playing.
He defines understanding in the same page that you quoted a moment ago, Nevitt, 106. And then he goes on page 107 as well to talk about understanding at the end of the page.
Yeah, Enrique almost quoted this, that this is the bottom 106 in the Pluhar, which is like in the middle of B75, A51. Understanding, on the other hand, is our ability to think the objects of sensible intuition. So I guess that's why I wanted to say it's, you know, it's so when I understand an empirical object, I guess it's proper to say I understand that this is an eraser, but understanding as a I'm not sure if you would, I don't know, Eric, I don't know if you'd call it a faculty, but understanding is an ability. It's an ability. It's a capacity of the mind to think objects, empirical objects. And then, you know, as Hunter said, and as Joseph was suggesting, it has these functions that it uses to structure those experiences. But I just wanted to emphasize that because, you know, understanding is a verb. I understand. But then on the other hand, it's also for Kant, it's also a noun, right? The understanding. It's a capacity and an ability of the mind to think in a certain way.
Yeah,
Did you see on the top of page 107, which I believe is an extension, Nevin, and what you and Luis said? It's the second full sentence on the top of page 107, the Pluhar edition. Without sensibility, no object would be given to us, and without understanding, no object would be thought. So is he saying one deals with sensation, the literal five senses, but the other is more cognitive, like just someone gets a flash of insight and they say, oh, this is the arrangement of these individual empirical objects, like the periodic chart of the elements.
I had a question that aligns with yours, Ed, right on this section. That he also says it's necessary that we make our intuitions understandable, and I was kind of thinking that this is where language steps in, right? That you have the intuition and the object, and so make it understandable and bringing it under concepts is at the same time bringing it into language.
I would hesitate to identify conceptuality with language.
Yeah, you would.
At least for Kant, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
Kant, and not just Kant. I mean, again, maybe not for another tradition, right? Those of a more Heideggerian bent, maybe that's allowed, right? But those of us in a different tradition, it's not so straightforward that we can collapse conceptuality into language.
Yeah.
I'll add one more caveat. I think, you know, doing well to conceive of understanding as a faculty of judgment, determinate judgment, bringing intuitions under a concept, right? And I'm going to push back a little bit on something the way Hunter was saying it was I'm mostly agreeing with, but there's a little bit of confusion there, and it was added on by Ed's comment. It's not the case that we understand something, that we fail to understand until we understand. Because the way Kant is describing this here, if you experience an object, you're thinking it through a concept. And that is an understanding. Even if we would say later, oh, well, you actually failed to understand. So in Hunter's description, you sit down and watch some arty film and you don't know what the hell's going on, you know, which in our usual language, we'd say, oh, you don't understand the film. But in Kant's language, we would say, you understand this to be confusing. You understand, you have an object in your experience, you're understanding. You're exercising the understanding. Although you might not say you understand the film, you're still having an experience of objects that you can describe conceptually. right, with determinate judgments, you're employing a faculty of understanding, even if you don't understand the artwork.
I mean, we never have access, and I never have access in my awareness to raw, unformed sensory data. You know, everything I experience is already an object. But if somehow I could separate those two, you know, the simply just the ability to understand what this is, the ability to literally to experience it as an empirical object already presupposes that there are certain structural features in my awareness that make this appear as an object rather than just a smear of, you know, raw sensory data. And so if, you know, the manifold of sensation, if there was this kind of cloud of raw sensory data that my senses were presenting to me, I don't even know that I could experience anything. But if I did, it wouldn't be objects. But the very fact that I can experience objects that have properties Kant would say, already presupposes that there is some organization happening in the background that makes it possible for me to even have this kind of experience. That not just understand in the like, well, I understand, you know, that this is an iPhone or whatever, but to experience this as an object with certain properties.
Okay, but what does he call that ability to experience that object with some characteristics?
The understanding.
So that's when he uses the word understanding.
I don't know. Eric's given a sort of not so sure look, but
So, I mean, is more. I mean, the term erkentnis, which Pluhar is describing, is translating as cognition. Is this element, which is on the other side, is intuition. Intuition and cognition together. You know, now we can talk about a faculty of understanding, having something to purchase, having really like taking an intuition and putting it in its basket, right?
It just when the way Nevitt phrased it clicked something in my head because it was what I was trying to say, not today, but I don't know, the first couple meetings. If a person blind from birth through surgery is given sight, they literally don't see what we see as individual objects. So they can't differentiate the clothes you're wearing from you, the headphones you're wearing, or the glasses, or the material objects behind you. You know, think of a Jackson Pollock painting that's moving. Right? It's very difficult for them to distinguish what we consider to be chair, t-shirt, face, glasses, back wall, lamp, thing on the wall. And if they're unable to, begging your pardon, cognitively say, oh, I see, that's a person who's X number of feet in front of the wall, and he or she is separate from that wall. If they can't do that, they go blind again. And so that's why, to me, Nevitt, when you said it the way you did, this separation of objects from each other, the ability, whatever that word is, I mean, I do think if that's Kant's sense of understanding / intuition / cognition, I think he's on to something.
you know that quotation you read, without sensibility, no object would be given to us, and without understanding, no object would be thought. And then the next sentence I noted in the chat is one of the most famous in Western philosophy. Thoughts without concepts are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind. And so, I mean, I think without the understanding doing its thing, I don't think I would have any kind of experience. I mean, I don't think I would even experience a void. I just, if you don't have both of those, you don't have experience. And so I think it may be even more profound than the blind guy, because it's not clear, because even, a blind person still lives in a world of objects. And my sense is what Kant is claiming is that without the understanding providing logical structure to my experience, I would not have any experience of any kind. And then if I didn't have any sensory data coming in, I would also not have any experience of any kind. It's only when you have sensory data coming in and being processed by the understanding, now you have experience. Now you actually experience something, anything.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting points. First, the whole sort of illustration through the example of, say, someone who's blind and then gets the ability to see, and they report that their experience is this sort of, chaotic Jackson Pollock kind of um, smorgasbord of sensations without discernible objects. And then there's also uh, child development psychologists that say the same about infants, that they have a kind of experience where they don't have the same kind of discernible objects or discernment between, like an inner outer kind of thing going on. It's more just kind of a multiplicity of intense sensations. So then that, but then that's, I think that shows kind of the distinction between, I think Connor would probably want to say something along the lines of, okay, yeah, that's kind of like your sensation without the concepts of the understanding to organize it into recognizable objects. But then, as Devin was just saying, Kant is also saying that experience is impossible without both of those. So then that makes me wonder, is this experience of, the infant or the person, the formerly blind person who can now see, is that, how does Kant explain that, because if there is indeed some aspect where the concepts are not working, but yet there's still experience, that seems, I don't know, it's like, I can't tell if it's a counterexample to Kant, or if it's a good illustration of the kind of basic principle of the distinction that he's trying to make. But yeah, either way, I think thinking along those lines helps somewhat with trying to grasp what's going on here with sensibility, intuition, thinking, the understanding, concepts. They've got these two faculties that coordinate together, and that's what gives us our experience. But yeah, it's hard to understand what's the way that they come together to give us that experience. So yeah, I don't know. Nor do I understand.
I mean, I think for Kant, experience necessarily is experience of an object populated world. So he's talking about experiencing objects. If we're gonna talk about like a moving Jackson Pollock where there are no objects, even here you might say, oh, there's a patch of blue. Oh, there's a patch of red. I can't say very much about it because the borders are fuzzy and changing and whatever, but I can conceptualize a few things about it. Even there, you're making objects, right? Even if it's not a discrete material object as such. you're thinking an object in terms of a patch.
Yeah, yeah. I see what you're saying. Although I still feel like there's just elements of experience where you can't have any kind of recognizable object. Um, so I don't know. It's it calls upon a kind of non-ordinary experiences or this sort of stretching of experience beyond these ordinary conditions, where I think in terms of ordinary experience, it's more or less that is what we experience is these discernible objects and whatnot. A kind of, the understanding is involved with a bunch of like unification of things, and it's kind of like he's describing your ordinary adult consciousness of the average thinker. But then it seems like there's just a lot of experience that you have to strain very much to sort of say, oh yeah, this is of an object. Is really an object is kind of more like what he's talking about is some kind of like recognizable thing through time. Um, but I don't know. Maybe Kant can convince me later
How
on. I
about
don't know.
how about the type of experiences that might lead to Newtonian physics? If we can get an analysis of this type of experience, we can then talk about how Newtonian physics can hold out synthetic a priori facts of nature, or just that nature is lawful as a precondition.
Uh, Jason, so I'm wondering like what kind of experiences you're thinking about. Um, that would be difficult to attribute to an object, especially in the way that Kant is describing. Uh, are you thinking like really bizarre psychedelic experience or something like that?
Uh, honestly, yeah, that's included in my thinking, but I think you could kind of go beyond that. So you've got the examples of uh an infant that conceivably doesn't experience the same way we do. Uh, someone who was congenitally blind that had cataracts and gets them removed, and they experience a kind of chaos of sensations with no objects. And then, yeah, I think any sort of kind of non-ordinary experience can lead to something like that. Um, so yeah, it could be something bizarre. I think actually a lot of uh, say contemporary like experimental film even is very much experimenting with exactly this sensation that kind of goes outside the bounds of identifiable objects and whatnot. Yeah, so like avant-garde art, film, uh, psychedelic experiences, possibly. Um, or even kind of you could have a sort of let's call it like pathological experiences. Like if you have like certain brain injuries, I think you could probably experience something like that as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to figure out like exactly these sort of examples, which seem to kind of show how the ordinary mind works by kind of, as we're so used to just simply that's the way it is. When it's not until you get some kind of contrast with that, you can see, oh, this is actually kind of like a special case to a certain degree, even though it is the ordinary way of doing it. Yeah, it's hard to figure out exactly what exactly that means in terms of, thinking about uh, experience in the way Kant does, where it's kind of a every possible experience has to have all these things because it seems to, I think these sort of examples of non-ordinary experience, they seem to show it's kind of like a continuum more so, where I think Kant is saying that there's maybe it's something kind of like that within a certain degree, but there's also sort of a pretty hard cut way of thinking about it where you need these things, these preconditions, understandings, concepts, sensation, intuitions, uh, the imagination to synthesize all these. And that's absolutely necessary for any experience whatsoever. So, yeah, I, I guess I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over. So, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
still having a hard time imagining an avant-garde art that is objectless, completely objectless. And moreover, yeah, I think even easier is the psychedelic experiences. That's often recounted in terms of objects, however, uncanny, unfamiliar. Like the line that comes into my head, dinosaur comptroller listening to Buck Owens, tambourines and elephants playing in the band. Those are objects, right? However trippy and psychedelic it is, sitting, looking through my back door.
Yeah. So I was also, and maybe I'm thinking too far ahead of the reading. But we're talking about like everyday objects, and I think uh maybe would fall more in line with Kant to think about it in terms of like the categories, right? Like, does a psychedelic experience escape the categories? Um, yeah, I don't think so. I think it's still contained.
Yeah, right. That's right.
And I don't know though. I'm kind of hesitant on that because um, I kind of do agree with Chase, or I have a similar interest at least about consciousness uh, when it takes on these different dimensions that we obviously have no or very little phenomenological investigations about, like people with Down syndrome or
I'm
really
thinking
severe.
that the category, the understanding and time and space are transcendental. They are the ground for the possibility of having any kind of empirical experience at all, of any kind, I think. And so I get, I'm thinking drugs might mess up your empirical consciousness, and your brain, um, but I mean, it's not going to touch your transcendental ego, right? I mean, the transcendental structures are transcendental. They do not populate the empirical world. They are the ground for the possibility of an experience of any empirical world.
Does this go back to Kant's conversation about space? Because I mean, isn't it that we have, and again, I don't know what words to use, but that we have a sense of space is what, think of depth perception, that we can have a sense of objects being objects because we have a sense of behind and in front of. And if that is making any sense, what category is Kant putting that in? A priori, pure, empirical. He's creating a structure of I thought the way people understand, even if it's the day-to-day world. And even if he's saying we cannot know the things in themselves because of our limitations of our sense perception, but as you pointed out last week, I think, Nevitt, you said, well, that's Kant's not saying there is no thing in themselves. It's just that because of the limits of our own perception, sense perceptions, we can't know them in and of themselves, but we can know something about them from our senses. But still, that's still presupposing we can distinguish things from other things. which I thought that's why his discussion of space and time were so important.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Space and time have a similar status as to the stuff we're talking about now. They're transcendental structures. The the difference is space and time are the forms of sensory intuition because everything we experience will always appear in space and time. And so the stuff he's talking about now have a very similar status. They're transcendental. They are features that the mind uses like space and time to structure our experience. So they're in that regard, yeah, that's why they're transcendental. He calls them the forms, the space and time are the a priori forms of intuition. So they are also a priori, they are also transcendental. They are the forms of space and time are the conditions for me having an experience that appears spatial and temporal. And then you have these logical forms that he's going to talk about in the understanding that then do further processing and make it possible for me to experience certain properties, general properties of empirical objects as such.
Yeah. By the same way, you can't, I mean, for Kant, you can't imagine, you can't intuit, you can't think any object whatsoever as outer without space. You can't imagine, or you can't intuit any object whatsoever, outer or inner, without temporality. Now he's going to say you can't think any object without this table of categories. This bare set of like absolutely necessary concepts for any object whatsoever. So it's not, I mean, it's probably easiest and most helpful to think about ordinary experience and ordinary experience of objects, but Kant really does literally mean any object whatsoever. These categories are conditions for thinking any object. Mental image, something outer, anything that the subject takes as an object to think, and to then form like a discursive judgment based upon this object. You'll have already submitted it to the table of categories.
Which I know he's talking about the dialectics, but it reminds me of the part I have highlighted on 114 that says rather like middle of 114, the Pluhar B85. Rather, we must first go outside logic to obtain well-based information about objects, in order then to attempt merely employing the information and connecting it to a coherent whole in accordance with logical laws, or better yet, in order to test the information by these laws. So it seems like he's creating almost like a I don't even know, I keep using the word scaffolding. Like he's creating like this structure, this scaffolding of how we can even have a logical use of the understanding.
He's doing a lot of work in this part too, differentiating between a general logic and a transcendental logic, and already indicating like he's, those of you guys have read the book, right? He's kind of given away one of the key lessons right here, right? This operation of general logic and syllogisms, it's deceptive. It leads us to believe we can form knowledge claims with general logic. If general logic is an organon for extending our thought, you take a concept like God and existence, you mix them up in the right way with a syllogism, boom, you have a proof. God exists. Now you know God exists. And he's kind of pulling back, that's an illicit use of general logic. Actually, if you look closely at what general logic is, it's a formal structure As far as actual matter, the matter that it's supposed to speak truth about, that's outside the realm of pure logic, right? You need experience in order to like give general logic anything to work upon.
So would it be right then? Yeah, because I thought of Anselm. I thought that he was basically thinking about like
Oh.
arguments like Anselm's. I was like
That's right.
kind of trying to
Well,
say
so-
that's
Even Thomas Aquinas, like he's kind of like, which is kind of funny because he almost seems to be like borrowing from Aristotelian categories and then kind of like criticizing the Thomist viewpoint on like the proofs of God, but kind of refining it in a way.
Well, he's not going to talk about. He's not going to say anything about God in this book.
A little bit towards the end, again, as an idea, a regulative idea. We can't prove. I mean, yeah. Again, we can't. It's not a matter for theoretical knowledge. It is not something that you can deploy general logic and prove that God exists.
Yeah, so he's not trying to. I mean, he's going to explicitly say, in this section, he's already said, you cannot legitimately use the understanding to try to get at anything that is not empirically accessible. Trying to do so is an illegitimate use of the understanding, and philosophers have been doing that. He says for thousands of years and really making lots of mistakes. And since God is not empirically experienceable, at least Kant would say so, the understanding, if you try to use the understanding to figure out what God is, you're just going to end up with contradictions. And so in this book, he's going to explicitly deny that we can use these empirical faculties to tell us anything about God.
One of my first conversations at Texas State with Hanks was on this topic. You know, it was like, didn't Kant kind of take this issue off the table for everybody, right? But we still had what's the name of the guy? Oh man, there's a British philosopher who was trying to prove the existence of God.
Yeah.
Berkeley?
No, he was still alive or recently
Very
died.
recently.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember right now. Anyway, you know it still happens. You know it still happens. You still have
The guy from Notre Dame, the Christian philosopher.
Yeah, he's Christian.
I would think so.
I don't remember his name off the top of my head right now. Plantinga.
Plantinga, that's it.
Yeah.
Plantinga. He wrote a book-length defense of the ontological argument.
Right. Yeah, so I know one of the first conversations I had with Hanks was like, didn't kind of like stop, like if we take this seriously, what's Plantinga doing? What are these people doing? And anyway, Hanks's kind of answer was more or less like, yeah, I don't think they really read the Kant. You know what I mean? There's a lot of the people in our tradition or in our field, unfortunately, who haven't sat with Kant and reckoned with it properly.
Can I ask a question about something Kant wrote at the very bottom of page 112 in the Pluhar translation and up on the first sentence of 113? It's A59. And he says, now the last two sentences at the bottom of page 112, not counting the footnotes. Now we have already earlier called the content of a cognition its matter. Hence, we shall have to say that no universal indicator can be demanded for the truth of cognition in terms of its matter, because such an indicator would be intrinsically contradictory. What is he saying?
Okay.
well, I think that little I just thought that was sort of a fun little he's introducing the transcendental logic, how thought gets its content, and the rules of logic and what logic ought to do. And he says, well, at least in the Geyer Wood, he says that it's totally natural that, you know, there's this question, and hence the vanity of their entire art is what he calls it, to ask the question, what is truth? Um, and it seems like that's actually pretty reasonable to expect of a logic to have some sort of you know, way to account for what truth is, how to distinguish it from non-truth, sure. And I took this whole segment to just be him saying that a general criteria for truth, as is kind of naturally sought by so many, or expectedly, you know, expectedly sought by so many, it's a contradiction in terms. It's just a contradiction to be seeking such a thing, because truth is specific. If we're going to take the logical form of truth, which is that the typical definition that the cognition conforms to the object or vice versa, object and cognition, they kissy, they're good, right? 1-to-1. That's object specific. But a general marker, indicator, or measure, a general criterion of truth would be universal. And thus this universal measure by which to measure all the particular objects of the universe can't be found. That's his art, I think. And so logic can at least tell us what truth isn't. That's what it can do. It can tell us universally what truth isn't, which i.e. is self-contradictory statements of the understanding. Right? I think
So this is him continuing his sarcastic comment on the at the very beginning of Roman numeral 3 on the division of general logic into analytic and dialectic. What is truth? And I mean, I thought I understood that. I can understand why he says that is an unhelpful question. I mean, I understand that. So this you're saying is a continuation of his argument on why that type of question is so broad as to be unhelpful.
right. I think it kind of, well, yeah, I guess I think that this kind of questioning is where he starts his discussion of dialectic, because he's I think it's in like B85 A60, in the second paragraph of A60. General logic analyzes the entire formal business of the understanding and reasoning into its elements and presents these as principles of all logical systems, blah blah blah, can be called an analytic, the negative touchstone of truth. So then just later on he starts kind of criticizing trying to go beyond that negative touchstone of truth capability that logic has. It has this negative value, which is true. Good. It's good. It's a good value. It's just it shows you what truth isn't. It can knock away bad examples, but it can't give you a universal positive. And he's trying to say that what we just showed with the whole truth conversation, for him, I think, is one example in a sense of this what he calls the general logic as a positive organon, the logic of illusion, and of illusion and sophistry, a sophistical art for giving to its ignorance. I guess, yeah, that seems like that's there's a lot of questions I think that would fall into this bin for him.
Well, Hunter, since you just used that word, I'm going to ask you, and I could probably just look it up and figure it out, but tell me what the difference between a canon and an organon is, and no phallus jokes.
I think the canon is like a collection, and an organon is like a. I see. I was literally gonna shut up. All right. Well, okay. Oh no, I just thought of it. A canon is sort of like a book, kind of with the splitting right down the middle and opening up wide, right? Like a book full of tables of data. The organon is sort of like the pencil or pen rod, kind of inserting into the book, kind of pointing directly into the organon. I'm just saying. I think that the canon
he calls it an instrument on page 115.
That's right.
Paragraph. He does use the word instrument, and then I don't know if it's him or the translator puts organon in parentheses after the word instrument. So I thought it meant more of a. Are you gonna laugh if I say tool? You know,
it's like praxis, and canon is like theory, and that's the way I understood it.
Which
I
one?
don't know.
Theory?
Canon is would be like theoretical aspect of something of a concept, and the organon would be like the praxis, the practical use of that canon. That's how, at least that's how I saw it.
I mean, yeah, I think you're both like in the right area, right? Like, what he's explicitly saying, right, is okay. So we have we've inherited these terms, right, from Aristotelian logic. I'm going to do a GE Moore hand waving thing about modus tollens and modus ponens. Actually, if Moore had read Kant, he would understand that modus tollens and modus ponens don't actually extend our knowledge, right? It's just a canon for making sure that we are clear and not contradicting ourselves, right? But we can't extend our body of knowledge using modus ponens. We can't prove the external world exists through this, movement of general logic. That for in
So,
order. Go
so
ahead.
then that's the canon?
So the canon would be, we have inherited these terms, modus ponens, modus tollens. We teach them to school children, and they're pretty good. And if you got a problem with them, of course, you can do a little immanent critique and say, actually, this violates the principle of non-contradiction. Modus ponens is, up to this point, been taken as, gospel, but it ain't gospel. I mean, so you can always try to explode the canon, but it's just the accepted kind of, these are the rules of logic, right? This is how modus ponens works and modus tollens works. And these are the fallacies, right? I forget the antecedent and consequent fallacies, right? There's the fallacies that are the other side. And that's the canon, right? We just inherited that. We teach it to people, but we're not using these rules of logic to extend our knowledge, especially on objects that we don't experience, right? So you would think modus ponens and modus tollens, we could then take the concept of God and the concept of existence and prove actually through a logical procedure that God exists as the most perfect being, right? And that's what he's explicitly saying. General logic is a good canon for checking as a negative qualification on truth. Does it contradict itself? No, it doesn't contradict itself. Then it might be true. It might be true. But you run the canon just to make sure that first it doesn't contradict itself. Because if you find it contradicts itself, then you just stop there. That's incoherent. You're contradicting yourself. You violated the canon of logic, right? But what he's trying to say is suggest as well is up to this point, many people have been using these logical forms to try to extend our knowledge. And this is what one of the major things in this book is he's trying to say that's an illicit move.
So then the organon would be a instrument by which we extend our knowledge?
That's right. That's why
Okay.
extension, right?
Well, that's what you're saying. He's saying, Eric, is that don't accept received wisdom, don't accept what has been passed down to us. Use it to see what you're finding out with it. And if it's contradictory, well, then that should tell you everything about the inadvisability of using it as a basis to try to extend your understanding.
Have the courage to use your own understanding. Yeah, I mean, he's very much all about don't accept things just as because it's been taught to you in a school.
Yeah.
I have hopefully a quick question. Does Kant have any kind of a positive example of what an organon is? So I vaguely recall him saying that various things, or maybe one thing, is an organon, maybe like critique or something like that.
Well, I had the question, Chase, is the dialectic an instrument? Is the dialectic an organon?
Well, I think is what he says about the dialectic is that the problem with it is that it's used as an organon when it should be properly just a canon. But then I wonder if what is an organon, where is critique possibly something like that, or transcendental philosophy or
Yeah, no, I mean, he does think of the whole of his critical approach as a means through which a future metaphysics can then get security.
that would be the organon.
I would think of that as, yeah, what he's doing as a whole can be can serve as an organon for future metaphysics.
But I thought of like, you know, the most amazing. I guess maybe I'm not a very imaginative person, so like I just thought of like the reason that he was so bothered by this sort of misapplication of general logic into as a putative organon is that it doesn't do the job of one, and it produces bizarre, erroneous, contradictory results. And when I thought of what is a real organon or what's the kind of thing, I thought of like Aristotle's like writings on like poetics and stuff and like, you know, like politics and so on. Like there was a certain set of tools or basically conceptual apparatuses that helped deal with something like an empirical I guess that's it doesn't have to be so, I suppose, because you're saying the whole transcendental law like thing is an organon, but usually the ones that I thought of were like the, you know, like people trying to make uh an aesthetic, a philosophy that can help make sense of aesthetics, you know, and be used. It's like imagine if somebody tried to write a codex on how to judge art. You know, if I imagine if somebody did that, right? Like all the many works on aesthetics, like how and why to judge art in whatever way they think might be appropriate or according to what metric. I feel like that would be an organon. That'd be like a tool that I can use to, you know.
I can't see the
Eric,
title
I
you
can't
held
read
up.
that, Eric. Yeah, what is that?
Aesthetic theory by oh, is it? You know, I think I've heard about Adorno a couple times last couple of years. But I can't place the man. Was he has an Italian name, but he's really German? I don't know. I'm confused.
Yeah, he's very German.
Okay.
Yeah, after Kant, I really would like to read Adorno at some point. I really would.
Can I ask another question? I don't want to, but if somebody has something they want to run with, I'll defer. At the top of page 117 in the Plural edition, above the gigantic transcendental logic section, right above that, I just had a question. I had two different questions. Was in this like B88, you know, up until transcendental logic, and that was he saying logic has limits and therefore we must temper logic with reference to the empirical world? And a second question was, is he taking a crack, not a crack, is he taking a shot at Descartes?
I don't think he's explicitly doing that here, but he will later. If that's what you're salivating for, I promise it's coming.
Well, what about the more general question I had about, is he saying logic has limits and that's why we have to temper logic with some kind of reference to the empirical world?
And I think that's part of that get that again, that quotation you read earlier,
Okay.
you know, thoughts without content are empty and intuitions without concepts are blind.
Okay.
So
The continuation of the same theme.
mhm.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, you can do logic, you can do pure logic, and Kant, you know, accepts that. You can just do abstract logic. I guess in his day it would have been syllogistic logic, but today it would be, you know, today's version of formal logic. And that's interesting and it's useful, but it doesn't give you any information about the world. At least so, I mean, maybe some people would disagree, but that's the basic idea. You know, like Eric said, modus ponens, if P then Q, P, therefore Q. Okay, if I make an argument, it needs to be sound or it needs to be valid, you know, and it needs to follow certain logical it needs to be logically consistent. But the fact that it's logically consistent doesn't tell me anything about what's going on in the world. So if you want knowledge, you've got to get some empirical stuff in there somehow.
What's that Latin phrase that I can't think of it? That which was to be demonstrated.
Quoderat demonstrandum.
Yeah, or QED in simple form.
I love that Louise just
Yeah.
fired that out. Well done. That's awesome.
Yeah, quad what
QED.
erat
That
was
it's abbreviated QED. Yeah.
demonstratum, to be demonstrated. Yeah. Spinoza sometimes used.
But would Kant accept the idea of a self-evident truth?
I'm kind of stumped. What are you thinking of as a self-evident truth?
I agree. That stumped me. Because I think like in a way, yes, but maybe not, depending on, yeah, like what, yeah, yeah. What do you?
Well, would he say the principle of, I mean, and maybe Hegel disagreed, but would Kant say the principle of non-contradiction would be self-evident?
Yeah, I would think that he probably would say certain analytic truths like that are self-evident.
Yeah. Like two straight lines going on infinitely in either direction will never touch. Like that sort of thing, or the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Like, would that be like a self-evident, or is that like or am I getting too far
Well,
into
those
synthetics?
those are synthetic.
Synthetic a priori,
That's what I'm
but not
saying.
They
self-evident.
are a
Yeah.
priori.
So they're not so they are a priori, but they're not self-evident. They're a priori. But all bachelors are unmarried. That is self-evident, right? Maybe that's an analytic. Analytic statements are the self-evident then.
Yeah.
Provided you understand what the term bachelor means, then you already also understand that it means unmarried man. And in that sense, it would be self-evident. But I feel like that already has little qualifying, like provided that you use this term and you understand it when you use it. If you never heard that term before, you wouldn't just see it and then, oh, it is self-evident that by looking at this term, I know what it means.
Yeah, my dad was arguing that mathematics was, I mean, that's self-evident, but was obviously true and real, and he demonstrated that by counting things. He started pointing at things and counting. So I think that's an example of something that maybe people think is self-evident, but it requires instead a whole kind of synthetic context to give even the sort of impression of it being self-evident. But yeah, I think really that self-evident thing, it has to be just something analytic. Okay, the synthetic a priori, they're necessary, they're apodictic, but I don't think you can say they're necessarily self-evident. I think that just would only work with analytic truths. But I don't know. I don't know anything. Really, I think my dad was right. You just count things and know that everything is math, and therefore that's why I should get a job and make more money. And I don't know. I'm just gonna read this book, make some Faust jokes, and it's all good.
There's lots of stuff on father son there, probably, yeah. Be a bit of use.
Yeah, I still see Kant as a kind of father figure personally. I don't know about y'all, but
Because you're trapped in the Oedipal complex from the despotic signifier.
it's kind
The
of funny you
fact
say
that that
that.
makes sense to me genuinely scares me.
I wonder how many other people that makes sense to. Probably just me and you.
Probably.
I've been scarred by those words in these discussions before, so they just trigger little minor traumas in my psyche. I had a lot of trouble. We don't have to go all this way if somebody else has something they want to beforehand, but I had a lot of trouble with the last few pages that set a transcendental guide for discovery of all pure concepts of understanding, section 1, on the understanding's logical use as such. I had a hard time figuring out what he was talking about, especially when he started talking about judgment and, the indirect judgment, therefore, is the indirect cognition of an object, namely the presentation of a presentation of it. And all that language, I got I got pretty much lost.
Nevitt, I did too. And what started me being lost was the last sentence right above analytic of concepts on page 119, where he said, where these concepts lie prepared until finally, on the occasion of experience, they are developed and are exhibited by that same understanding in their purity, freed from the empirical conditions attaching to them. What did he mean by that?
So wait, where was that again?
It's on page 119 in the Plohar.
Oh, okay.
And it's right above, literally the last sentence above where you started with analytic of concepts, chapter 1.
Yeah, so he's telling me what he's about to do next.
Yeah, okay, but I don't understand what he's going to do next. That's I mean, I don't understand that sentence.
So again, we're going to abstract out of our experience what must be towards the goal of finding what must be necessary for experience.
But he's going to start with experience.
Everything, all knowledge begins in experience, but does not necessarily arise from experience.
So he's going to, when you say abstract, he's going to be more conceptual.
Yes.
And he's going to try to give more general statements that are less empirically specific.
Oh, yes, exactly that. That's right. I would say just everything you said except more general, say transcendental.
Oh, okay.
Necessary for the condition of thinking any object whatsoever.
My analogy. So here's an analogy that I think of. It's not great. It's not perfect, but to a transcendental argument. Let's say that I can see, but I've never seen an eyeball. Let's say I've never seen somebody else's eyeball. I've never seen my eyeball in a mirror, but I know I can see. And so from the fact that I can see, I know I must have an organ of sight. And because I have and then if I look at the way I see things and I see colors and I see variations in light and dark and variations in tints, and I see these features of my vision. I even if I don't even if I never see an eyeball or never, dissect an eyeball, I can infer that there must be structures in this organ of vision that are responsible for making me able to see color and to see dark and light and to see these different features of sight. And so I think of it, a transcendental argument is kind of like that. I have a certain kind of experience, and my experience has certain structural features, And so based on that, I can infer that the ground of experience, like, like the from sight, I can infer that I have an organ of sight, or that there is a basis for sight. There is something that sees. So from the I am conscious, therefore there is some ground of consciousness. There is something is problematic, but it's kind of like something that is conscious. And because of the nature of consciousness, I can infer that organ of consciousness, as it were, has certain structural features to it. So that's kind of one way I think of transcendental argument. Let's look at the structure, the general structure of experience, and infer what must already be in place for me to have this kind of experience. And so I think that's what he's previewing there is just this, that's kind of the next step in the project, is in a sense like it was like you were conceptually walking backward from from your cornea back into your eyeball and trying to conceptually think what kinds of, I mean, I may never come up with what is a rod, what is rods and cones and stuff, but I can nevertheless infer that there must be certain kinds of apparatus, as it were, back there. And so I think of him doing something similar. Let's start with experience and conceptually kind of walk back behind experience and figure out what must already be in place for my experience to have these kind of general logical features. That's the way I think about a transcendental argument. It's kind of like walking backwards from experience into what must be already in place back there. Yeah, and I think, some of you guys understand this, what judgment is and the relation of judgment understanding. And I guess, he's going to give us a lot more details here shortly, but those last couple of pages, um, I don't know, maybe I just wouldn't worry about it, and maybe he'll make all this. Maybe this is one of those cases where he's, giving us hey, here's where I'm headed, so don't get too caught up if you don't understand all this, maybe. But I'm just not sure. Um, like this is, let's see, this is at A68, B93, kind of in the middle. Concepts are based on the spontaneity of thought, whereby sensible intuitions are based on the receptivity for impressions. Okay, I get that. Now the only use that the understanding can make of these concepts is to judge by means of them. But in such judging, a concept is never referred directly to an object, because the only kind of presentation that deals with its object directly is intuition. I mean, I kind of get that. Because intuition, like, there it is. Instead, the concept is referred directly to some other presentation of the object, whether that presentation be an intuition or itself already a concept. Judgment, therefore, is the indirect cognition of an object, namely the presentation of a presentation of it. I don't understand that, and I don't understand pretty much anything that follows after that. So I don't know if anybody has any insights into. I don't understand really what he's saying about judgment and its relation to in this business about it being indirect and the presentation of a presentation.
I take it that he's just talking about like the building blocks of thinking, how you can get away from the intuition, and like at heart it's still the intuition that you're thinking about, but it's uh through more elaborate um tools.
But just like
Yeah,
this, go ahead.
yeah, there's the initial intuition of anything. Let's say it's, an object, right? A tomato. right? And then there's any thought predicated off of that intuition. This is a tomato, right? Now formed of discursive judgment, which is a presentation of that presentation.
Okay, so it's like I don't, Descartes in the meditations when he's talking about these different kinds of thoughts, and he says judgment is about something. And so when you form a judgment, you're making a judgment about something. So like you said, when I say the tomato is red, judgment is a kind of thought, Descartes says, but then it's a judgment, it's a thought about a thought. It's a thought about a tomato. So is that what basically when he says presentation of a presentation?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Whereas the first presentation is what is intuited. The presentation of the presentation is it's thinking what has been intuited.
But the experience of the tomato would be at least to use the, I'm not sure if the other translation uses the word, but cognition. So I cognize, as it were, a tomato, but then I form a judgment about the tomato. So that's the judgment is a
Now,
kind of presentation about that presentation.
the cognizing is already forming a judgment. It's
The
bring the
cognizes.
cognizing is through concept, right? And it's through a concept that you realize this is a tomato. That's a discursive judgment right there.
So would he say then to use when you use the understanding, I mean, that's not really a way to use it because it sounds like I have the option of not using it. But when the understanding is an operation, it is already making judgments. Is that
Yes, that's
okay?
right. For Kant, the understanding is always it works by making discursive judgments. Intuition to concept. Boom. Like this goes with this. This goes with this. I have an intuition, I have a concept that goes with it. Here's an intuition, here's a concept that goes with it. Even if that concept is confusing, non-distinct, it's still suspended. I don't have a firm concept for it. You have a concept for it, insofar as you take it as an object. Insofar as you take it an object, you're already supplying a concept.
And that's already a judgment.
That's judgment. Yeah, that's right. To bring a concept, a concept in a relationship of determination upon that intuition.
And that was your example before today, Eric, when you said to say the movie is confusing, that's still making a judgment.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's still holding an object for thought. Even if it's a confused thought or not a very clear thought, it's still a thought expressed in concepts about a thing in the world that you didn't invent out of your solipsistic mind, right? You intuited it in some sense, you found it confusing, you told everybody about it, or you kept it to yourself. Either way, there was some kind of discursive judgment at work.
So judgments are the way that concepts sort of work to form experience, and then that's what sort of, so there's a judgments on that kind of constitutive level of experience, and then that's what would make possible a more explicit judgment. Like, okay, yeah, the tomato is red. So I have an experience where I have concepts, all these categories, and the way that that gives me a recognizable object, the tomato, that's judgment, right? Judgments are involved in that.
Yeah.
And that's what makes
As soon as you recognize it as a tomato, which is, or as an object, right? Even if you're like, I think it's a tomato-like thing. No, it's a tomato, right? As soon as you take it as an object, you already have a concept at work that this is an object. Then later on, we can say specifically it's a tomato. But yeah.
And then that sort of explicit judgment that I can make, that would still be a judgment, just a different type.
This is, yeah, so the understanding works in the way of discursive judgment. When we get to the third critique, then he wants to talk about a different type of judgment, a reflexive judgment. But this is more about an encounter. If you want to talk about different kinds of experiences, and it was kind of what you were getting towards, Chase, but I don't know. Avant-garde art in particular, you could say really like works on what Kant is describing in the third critique in the form of a reflexive judgment instead of a determinate judgment. So we don't necessarily understand avant-garde art until we have. I mean, we have object experience. We are the faculty of understanding is working, but in our normal parlance, right? You don't actually understand the avant-garde art until you've struggled with it with your imagination somewhat. You have to build up to an adequate concept to it. It's not ready, you know. You have to kind of form it in a kind of playful interaction with the artwork, right? So you actually have to engage and it's a unique faculty because it actually extends the subject's powers and capacities. The object asks the subject to kind of like extend their form of judgment. But this is in the third critique. This is aesthetic, like art and the sublime. It's a different kind of judgment than our normal object experience. Which again, our experiences of art, you could also say at the foundation it says of an object, but as art, there's another level of judgment, right? So even an aesthetic experience where reflexive judgment is happening, determinate judgment is still kind of a bedrock of that. It's implied.
Yeah, I left my third critique at home. Still in Atlanta.
Never leave house without it.
But I read the most of the part of the Sublime, so I think from that I can get what you're saying.
Yeah. That hints somewhat towards it. Yes, that's right.
So when I experience the empirical world, that is my understanding forming judgments already, even if I don't express that as a judgment. But then go ahead.
Yes.
But then I can also expressly state a judgment. So I can experience, I can be eating dinner and eating a tomato, and my understanding is already at work because I'm eating a tomato. But then I can stop back and say this tomato is sour, and so there I'm making an explicit conscious judgment. So that's also a judgment, but there's already judgments implicit in the operation of the understanding.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, that's helpful.
Are those judgments the way that Nevitt was salami slicing the experience of the tomato? Are they differences in degree? But they're all just judgments, or are they different? Is there a deeper difference amongst them?
There will be a difference that we can look at between the use of categories and the use of empirical concepts.
Okay.
That's pretty important.
You said use of
The
concepts.
categories.
Use of categories and use of
Empirical concepts.
use of empirical concepts. Okay.
So I wrote something like this up above talking to Tori, and I got this directly from talking with Eric. So, there are these concepts we're going to see that are transcendental and a priori, but the vast lot of our concepts, from what I understand, are empirical, and they're like literally, how did we come up with the idea of tomato? Well, we saw a whole bunch of things that look like that, and then we attached a concept and a word to it, and so when I think tomato, but it's not like there was a Platonic form of tomato somewhere that I like there's a concept of tomato in the understanding. No, there's there's a lot of empirical concepts that we just form through experience, and then we draw on those in our everyday experience. So when I'm eating this tomato, that concept of a tomato, I don't know, was handed to me in a book or by a teacher or by growing them or something, but there's some kind of empirical experience that allowed me to develop this concept. So that's an empirical concept. It's a concept that I formed through, various kinds of experiences in the world. It's an a posteriori concept. I think that's correct. Is that correct, Eric?
Yep.
I'm kind of getting an urge to eat one, but I
And
don't
then
think I
with a
have any.
salami, with sliced salami, since Ed added that.
That's right. Maybe on a bagel. That would.
There's nothing better than a tomato fresh off like a homegrown vine with salt.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's good.
My kids don't like tomatoes, and I'm like, eat this cherry tomato that is literally right off the vine on a summer day, and they're like, ooh, ooh, ooh. I'm like, what? How can you not enjoy that?
Well, I mean, you know how it is. It's like eating an apple when I was really little, it was awesome. And then I had like all this like Sunny D and Fruit Loops and stuff, and then I went back to apples and I was like, this is like paper. It became like just bullshit. A waste of, yeah. So tomato? No. And I've got, Instagram Reels and TikTok on my phone, and I'm all, I'm some youngster nowadays. I'm not gonna eat a tomato. It's bullshit.
So, Eric, I wanted to is my here there he is. My screen is shifting because um so Tori asked about what happens. I mean, to paraphrase, what happens when I recognize this thing as so there's an object and there's these a priori categories of the understanding that we're going to get to later as a priori concepts that make it possible for me to experience this as an object. But then there's these empirical concepts that allow me to identify this as this kind of empirical thing in the world. Um, does Kant talk about how all that works? Is that the schema, the schemata? Does he explain how all that works together to actually give me an experience of a particular kind of physical object?
So yeah,
Like what's going on with the categories and the manifold of intuition and empirical concepts such that I have an experience of a tomato?
how do we get the right concepts to the right intuitions?
Yeah.
Right? That's the schemata.
Okay.
That's again probably the most difficult section of the CPR. And something that I honestly, it's not bad for what it is, but I think this is something that Hegel honestly improves.
Don't encourage Hunter.
Hey, Eric kind of likes Hegel too.
Yeah. No, I feel like this is one of the things that Hegel really had his finger on as like this needs some more beefing up right here. Beef tomato. Although Roma tomato, since we have an Italian in the room, I think we should just hold out for a Roma tomato. The salami.
I agree with Nevitz kids. I don't like little cherry tomatoes. They're disgusting. I like the beefsteak tomatoes.
My kids don't like tomatoes of any kind unless they're completely smushed up in something like pizza sauce.
Well, they're younger too, so I
Oh,
know.
they're in their 30s. I mean,
Oh
I'd say
well,
that's younger.
well, yeah. Yeah. For me, I'm 67. 30s is younger.
It's a phase. It's a phase. They'll grow out of it, I think. Just give them time.
yeah. When my son was very young, pretty much all he would eat was McDonald's chicken fingers. So if he can grow out of that, maybe he'll grow out of his dislike of tomatoes.
Eric, I take this chance to ask you, since we're talking about this, I mean, shifting slightly, but we were briefly talking, I think, Navid, you asked the question first in terms of, I think, imaginations, but more as a like power of creation. So like new knowledge being created. I don't know exactly how to put it, but so we were talking about triangles, but I feel like it could be more or less the same. So if I'm looking at, without looking at an actual triangle, we can visualize one, right? Because our faculty of sensibility provides the spatial framework. But the concept of triangle, like with the, you know, the 3 points, angles, the 3 sides, is still like drawn from physical, empirical encounters, right? From the reality. So the mental image of the perfect triangle is not only a priori intuition. It's a construction in the a priori form of space, but it's guided by this a posteriori concept, correct? So like this like weird, like interesting fact, I don't know, that you can correct the imperfection of like of every real triangle and imagine like a flawless, abstract, ideal one. I guess it's telling me that the mind is not just this passive, you know, tool that does copy and paste of past impressions, but it's actively like dictating the rules of what counts as a triangle. So is this like fusion of the two giving me something new in like is creating something? And is this the a priori synthetic a priori, I guess?
Yes, that's right. We can say new, we could, once upon a time, Pythagoras could say new things about triangles that nobody had said before. And then how is that even universally valid? How does that work? That, you know, it came in history, you know what I mean? It's not innate in our heads that we all just discover if we think carefully enough, right? But actually geometry developed. And now we hold this to be true. How is that true? Well, I think you're right? It's the form of space, which is a priori. It's triangle, which is an empirical concept, which works on the form of space. So yes, it's an operation of the understanding to hold up. You know, again, I forget the exact language he uses, but it's a different kind of intuition than a sensible intuition or purely sensible. It works on the form of sensibility, the form of space, but it's not received to us. It's part of the imagination, but it's the imagination working after empirical experience, right? So you learn what things shapes are, you learn what triangles are, then you imagine one in your head, right? So it's not purely a priori. Triangle is not a concept in the categories, nor is it triangle a form of intuition. Right? Spatiality is the form of intuition. And then triangle would be an empirical concept.
But the confusing thing for me then is that you know, I mean, and I know Kant would not say this, but if it was only an empirical concept, then you could not make synthetic a priori judgments about it. So in other words, you know, like I've said before, if the only place I ever could learn about triangles was through sensory experience, then the best I could do is say the probability is very high that the sum of the angles of a triangle in Euclidean space is 180 degrees. I couldn't say it's exactly perfectly 180 degrees. And so what's confusing is, you know, like saying, well, I probably would never have the mental image in my imagination of a triangle if I didn't first have experience of triangles out there in the world. But then are you saying that once I have that empirical experience and I bring it into my imagination, that because of the a priori form of space, I can then recognize that that object has necessary a priori properties. Is that how it works?
Right, right.
And that is the imagination at work when I'm like right now when I'm visualizing a triangle. That is the imagination, right?
Yes, that's right. It's one of the key components of the synthetic unity of a perception, later known as the transcendental subject. Imagination.
You know, I heard a radio story here a while back about a particular condition that I forgot what percentage of the population have it, called aphantasia, where they literally cannot imagine, they have no mental picturing ability at all. And they interviewed a woman, you know, like one of the reporters was had this, and she didn't even realize it. She thought that when people said, imagine a green apple in your mind, she thought they were just being metaphorical, because she literally cannot do that. She cannot form mental images. And then there are other people that have, I think it's called hyperphantasia, where they just have all this crazy shit going on in their imagination constantly. Like one lady described it as, it's like having she just learns to ignore it. It's like having a television running all the time, a loud television, and after a while you just ignore it because all this stuff is going on. But I'm wondering what, you know, I mean, this is kind of like maybe Chase's question. It's probably not fair to ask Kant, but, you know, I wonder, yeah, how that would affect his thesis that, you know, of the work of the imagination and the way it functions in the mind. Because there are
As
people
far,
apparently who just don't have that.
well, as far as securing the truths of geometry, probably those people wouldn't be pioneers in the field.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I know.
I think you would also say whatever Pythagoras figured out still holds true for people with aphantasia, even if they can't affirm it in their head.
Hmm.
Well, some composers, musicians said they saw colors when they heard musical notes.
Well, that's, yeah, synesthesia. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even, you know, when I was an engineering student, we learned about Maxwell's equations, which describe electromagnetic fields. Maxwell's equations, I don't, they're very, I can't remember. They're very similar, or at least some of them are the same. Some fluid equations, fluid flow equations. And so, you know, when you talk about, you look at Maxwell's equations, and you know, if you work with that stuff long enough, you can actually see, it's like you can see these images in your mind of field lines moving and sources and sinks, you know, like a positive charge is like a water faucet and negative charge is like the sink, and you see, you know, current running from one to the other. And so there, you know, there's people who work with abstract mathematics, or people who in engineering, maybe I should say, who work with mathematics a lot. These equations actually can, some of them, if they're visual thinkers, begin to sort of produce images in their mind. They can see, as it were, fields and this sort of thing. So, you know, I guess it's just different people have different degrees of that capacity. It's really helpful in engineering. Oh, look, that's not a tomato though, right? That's an apple. Yeah, well.
It's a tomato. I don't think I'm allowed to, or this isn't my tomato though, so I can't eat it. I mean, not right now. I think I would upset my host. I would get yelled at.
You're not home?
No, no, I would. Yeah. It'd be the law of the father would rain down upon me. Be bad. Probably get castrated.
You should do it. We'll clip it and maybe it'll go viral. And
And
we'll
I
get
want to
more
see,
followers on the YouTube channel.
and I want to see the juice running down your face.
That could be a really cool thumbnail, I
I
think.
feel like that request from Devitt, here, I'm gonna call my host into the room and try to get their reaction.
Yeah, just explain it's for Kant.
I cannot eat a tomato like I can eat an apple. It's that I no.
So you see
Hey,
how
Marissa, Marissa, Ray, come here. What is this? You just take a
Ick.
bite of a tomato? Can you hear him?
no,
Yes.
what did they say?
He asked me if I took a bite of a tomato.
Which it looks like you did. And it exploded all over you.
I don't know. Is that an empirical judgment?
I mean, that could be an apple that just looks like a tomato, I guess.
It's not apple, it's tomato. I know that because
Okay.
of the categories of the understanding and their judgments.
But what about transubstantiation? It could have like accidents. That could be. Are you sure that's not the body of Christ?
Yeah,
Oh wait, no. It would have to be a Wait, is it a carbohydrate?
no.
That's closer to being. Anyway, I'm coming up with a new religion based on beer and pizza.
Oh, I'll join that one.
Yeah, pizza is the body and beer is the blood. And it makes perfect sense because pizza, first of all, pizza was designed to simulate cannibalism. The sauce is like the blood, the cheese is, skin or whatever. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice
Awesome.
to meet
I think
you.
Hegel said something like that too, right? Yeah.
Probably.
But yeah, I think the world needs a new Eucharist metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, think
Yeah.
about how much more popular church would be if they served pizza and beer instead of little crackers and wine.
Yeah.
Probably get a lot more people.
I think just go back to the original thing and just actually drink blood and eat people.
Well, there were
The original Christianity, or
Well, the mystery wasn't it was based on mystery religions, and we don't really know. Like a lot of those records didn't survive. Well, because when you have a religion based around non-procreation, it's gonna sort of be difficult for that to survive.
did Dionysians eat people, or did they just
Right.
have wild parties? I don't know.
But I think didn't Philip K. Dick say something about that? It was like the Gnostics didn't survive. The Gnostics died out and didn't procreate or something like that, so their knowledge died with them.
I think a lot of researchers on the Gnostics have pointed that out, that your religion doesn't, if you have reproduction banned in your religion, it does not last very long. Its
Yeah.
conditions for reproducibility are not internal to it, so
So the Catholic Church figured this out, and they figured out that you have to, well, maybe they didn't figure this out, but it's all about, indoctrination from youth. And then they want to make sure you have kids before you're old enough to drink. Or ideally before you're old enough to vote, but that's taboo. They can't talk about that anymore. But anyway, I think I've said too much. I'm gonna like say something bad if I let myself continue. It was nice meeting all of you.
Nice meeting you. The Shaker, that happened to the Shakers too. They were abstinent and they died out because they didn't get enough adherents to join, and they just went away.
this tomato's really good. I'm glad I ate it.
You're glad you're eating it.
Glad I mean, I think I'm the entertainment for tonight, I guess, so might as well.
Experimental philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, so my Ray, who was there, that was actually the person that did not have a good. I was hoping for his wife, who would have yelled at me for eating the tomato. I was hoping for that.
Oh, okay.
Instead of,
He's really tired, and we just walked all the way from like the
Yeah.
hotel their parents were at.
but still, that's fun.
Yeah, but yeah, for some reason that made me think of transubstantiation, which then reminded me of my beer and pizza religion.
So beer and pizza religion.
There's how that got.
Y'all down? Probably not.
Well, if you're being serious about the question about the Romans, there seems to be evidence that the birth rate of the Romans, the actual Romans within the Roman Empire, were declining, and that's why there were some innovations in the Roman Empire to first make Italians citizens, and then in 212 AD, or what's it called now, after the Common Era or the Common Era CE, everybody in the empire was a citizen. But there was, and in fact, Romans at the time talked about declining birth rates of the Romans, and they were not sure what was contributing to it. But some people say literally it was very biological, and it was the heat of the water in the Roman baths was actually contributing to lower sperm counts.
They should have pulled out their cannon instead of the Organon. Yeah, okay, throw your tomatoes at me. Fine, I'll see myself out.
Bum.
Okay. Well, we will see you guys next week.
I'll be safe.
Okay.
See y'all next week. Bye.
I can't let this go away.